Well, I've had this book in me for a long time. Before I was teaching full time, before I started teaching full time 2 years ago in the Carroll School, I had a long career as a university administrator, a software executive, an independent consultant, and through that whole time, I was also teaching business communication. So I've been quite a student and an examiner for years of what it takes to communicate in business, how business and individuals rise and fall based on their communications. But I've always been particularly interested in the unique relationship between a consultant and a client. It's quite a changeable relationship, and communication is particularly important in that environment. So it's something that I wanted to study. In addition, over the years, my own students have come back to me once they're in business and said, I am so glad that I had some preparation for communication because I really didn't know what to do on the job and how to interact with anyone, that first email, that first report. So I think we onboard students very well into companies, and we groom employees very well in terms of the specific skills we want them to have. But these baseline skills, and communications being one of them, we don't often pay much attention to. We're hearing it more and more from industry. So many of my own clients over the years and other people that I've been in contact with in business have really stated very clearly that it's a concern they have about how students migrate from their MBA programs or their undergraduate programs into business, and that they stumble a bit in the communications area, either in writing or with oral presentations. So they really want this. And interestingly, in 2015, Burning Glass Technologies did a study looking at soft skills that employees wanted and were having difficulty finding. They looked at millions of job postings, and found that of 15 different industries, 13 of those wanted communications as the number one skill. The 14th wanted writing as the number one skill, and the 15th, more interested in customer service, wanted that. So it's pretty obvious that there's a burning need for this, and it's something we need to address. And I thought that I had a unique perspective on it, and I would be able to really take a look and dive very deeply into the topic. So I have in this book. So my target audience is obviously consultants, but I define that very broadly. I'm really talking about anyone or any entity that's outside of an organization, and it's helping that organization by going inside. And that's the dynamic that I'm really looking at, which is, we come in from the outside to help someone, and it could be because that client doesn't have the expertise, doesn't have the time, doesn't have the experience with whatever it is our company or we know. And so we move in to actually help, and then we move out. So that's really the group I'm looking at, is anyone who is involved in that kind of dynamic. Certainly, students who are looking, particularly grad students who are interested in consulting, would find this very useful. I would say employees who are internal consultants from one department to another would find this particularly useful because they, again, are in that relationship. But also seasoned consultants who perhaps want to have a bit of a primer, again, on general communications, what they should be looking at to spruce theirs up a bit. And we have a lot of people now who have been experts in their fields for so many years and become consultants, but really haven't been in that relationship and that dynamic with the client. I think the book would be very useful for them. My publisher, Business Expert Press, fortunately has these collections, and the idea around the collection, this one's in the corporate communication collection, but the idea is for these to be very niche pieces that that are quite focused at a particular topic, and that a reader could, in 1 to 2 sittings, really understand very deeply a particular topic with some very good examples. And so that's what the book is. The key takeaways of communication for consultants really revolves around two major areas. One is the preparation that we must be involved in. We call it audience analysis, to take a look at what the client needs from the communication rather than necessarily what we are thinking we must do. So it's really looking at the value to the client. And there's actually a methodology that we go through, that I take the reader through on how to prepare that analysis. The other key takeaway is around the phase of an engagement, a consulting engagement, and what the dynamic is in each of these three phases, and how to address those. So going back to audience, the three major areas around audience that we all should look at when we're writing, and in particular consultants when they're dealing with clients, it's really looking at a situation, what product we're going to deliver, and how we deliver it. So I'll give you an example, and I talk about this example in the text. It actually came from an interview that I did. So let's say a project isn't going so well, an engagement, and you are a consultant and you receive from your client a pretty scathing email about the project. It's not going well, I don't have any confidence in the team, and let's say you received that one evening on an email. Your natural inclination would be to respond to the email, but that's the point at which you must pause, and this is what we talk about. And the pause is really because we want to defend ourselves immediately, maybe even in a very gentle way, but we want to say, no, this team is very good and they've done this and they'll do fine. But really, I think what we need to do is step away, evaluate that situation, and really think about, is the answer in another email, or is there something else going on here? So we might come to the point that the product isn't an email, but it might be a face-to-face meeting. And in the particular example that I mentioned, we recount how in this situation, the response really was a face-to-face meeting was better because the person hadn't written truly in the email what they were thinking. So it's often that when we receive a communication, especially with someone from the outside, a client or a consultant, we might not really be sure what's going on. We may not have communicated with that person much in the past. This is a new relationship, perhaps, and we need to pause a bit and evaluate the situation. And then, of course, the last piece of that is the delivery, and the delivery might be a meeting between the team manager, the executive, and the client. So it's always looking at those three, and that's particularly important in business communication generally, and even more important when you are the outsider, the consultant who's making their way to help internally. So that's the phase around audience analysis. Within an engagement, I divide the book the way a typical engagement is divided, which is pre-engagement, engagement, and post. Pre-engagement, we come in not knowing one another. We are probably very much more formal. We're very careful about everything that we write and present. It may turn into part of our contract. And sometimes we're welcomed with open arms, and everyone wants us there. But oftentimes there's some resistance because the reason a consultant goes into an engagement is usually to make change. We know change is difficult. So sometimes we have some obstruction in the communication, and simply because there is in receiving us. So I talk a lot in the book about what that environment is like, what a consultant needs to be concerned about and aware of in terms of dealing with the client, and also the way the consultant is feeling. The consultant is very excited, can't wait to change the world, and it might be the time to pull back ever so slightly. So that's really an idea of the pre-engagement. Within the engagement, we're typically all working very hard to an end. And what usually happens there is we're much more peers. We are working with one another day in and day out. Some of these projects go on for years. But that's the time to be very wary about communication, because we may say too much. We may not be as polished and professional as we should be. And we often run into to problems in the engagement period. So we talk a lot about that phase. I talk a lot about, and again, assessing the environment and what the situation and how it affects communication. In the post-engagement, we're sort of wrapping up the project with a bow. We want to leave. We want to do that, of course, very professionally. And here we're really looking at how do we write materials that bring a finale, I would say, to the engagement, and perhaps open up opportunities to come back around again. So those are the key takeaways from the book. I hope readers use the book to prepare themselves and for an engagement. I hope that experienced consultants can use the examples in the book as well as the advice, but certainly the examples. The book is really lots of dialogue, discussion about the engagements, as I mentioned earlier, and the environment in that period, but it's backed up with specific examples. So for someone who needs an example of how to deliver bad news, how to write progress reports, all of that material is there, as well as a very detailed explanation on performing audience analysis in each of these situations. So I'm hoping it's a very practical book for new consultants and seasoned consultants who are facing an engagement. I think it would be I wish I had had it before I walked into an engagement. If I had spent a couple of nights reading something like this, I think I would have been very prepared for what was going to come at me and how I needed to interact with my clients. So I'm very hopeful that that will be the situation. And I think for MBA students and for undergraduate business students, or really for anyone who's thinking of being involved in a consulting environment, I think it will be very helpful as an overview of what they're about to encounter. As I was researching and writing this, I became acutely aware of, I suppose, what I already knew, which is this is such an important topic for companies, for business people, and it's one that we underestimate often. I think we're very careful about, again, making sure that whomever we hire knows very deeply their particular skill. But this was just a good reminder that these benchmark skills like communications and writing are extremely important in success for business. So I was really reminded of that throughout, and it made me very appreciative for the work that has been my life's work. So on a personal level, it was wonderful to be able to pull together the experiences from my own corporate work, my nonprofit work, and my teaching for all these years. So I sort of see it as a gift from something that's been inside of me to help others succeed in business, and I hope it will.